Do we have free will? What does it mean to be free? Is freedom real or a psychological construct we humans made to justify our existence? Are we only the ones capable of free will? There are several prominent definitions of free will. The common one comes from libertarianism, which holds that true free will exists and that our choices are completely independent of prior events or physical determinism. However, as we discussed before, humans have predisposition. We do not exist in a vacuum. We have genetic and environmental factors that influence our actions. There's also a case of bias towards this definition, which is mainly championed by a theological perspective, where humans are the only beings with free will, actively denying the consciousness of non human animals. Every day in our lives, we often make choices based on our social and material conditions, at our jobs, our taxes, even with our friends and family. So, does this mean we don't have free will? Well, no. We still have the capacity to make our own choices. We still have the ability to reflect on them and resist our predispositions. As we discussed in a previous video about personal resonance, we are pulled by a specific purpose regardless of our environment and genetics. Remember Faraday, where despite his upbringing, he relentlessly pursued what resonated with him. But this definition of free will and personal resonance is still anthropocentric, still defined by human motivations, which goes back to the problem of free will as a purely human possession rather than a universal fact of life. So, we should move past this anthropic perspective of free will and investigate it as if it exists on all scales and is a fundamental component to reality itself. And if we follow the thread of panpsychism, then free will is not just a part, but an intrinsic feature of existence. Welcome, conscious colleagues, to the Philosophy of Power, a movement dedicated to uncovering the secrets of reality and the power of consciousness. In today's episode, we tackle the notion of free will, how it aligns with panpsychism, and how it connects with our framework of power. The three positions: what it gets right and what it leaves out. Three dominant frameworks: libertarianism, determinism, and compatibilism. Each captures something real, each leaves something out. Libertarian free will, the philosophical position, not the political one, holds that our choices are genuinely uncaused by prior events, and this is not a theological invention. Its roots predate Christianity entirely. The Greek philosopher Epicurus agreed with the atomist picture of a mechanical universe, where reality is made of things, thus the birth of materialism. But he rejected its deterministic conclusion. His objection was sharp. If all atoms fall in perfectly straight parallel lines at the same speed, they would never collide. Nothing would ever change. The world could not have begun. His solution was the atomic swerve, a tiny, unpredictable deviation built into matter itself, not randomness as the source of freedom, but probabilistic openness as the mechanism, a field of possible interactions that a conscious mind can navigate. Epicurus was a committed materialist. He was proposing that degrees of freedom were built into the structure of matter itself. However, this did not stop theologians from adopting Epicurus' philosophy and integrating it into their religion. But rather than focusing on the metaphysical architecture of reality, they used this perspective to deal with the problem of morality. In the 2nd through 4th centuries CE, thinkers like Tertullian and Saint Augustine heavily formalized libertarian free will to solve the problem of evil. They argued that God is not the author of sin. Rather, humans abuse their gift of free will given by God to commit evil acts. The theological pressure shaped discussions of free will for a millennium, but the framing of the conversation moved from purely descriptive discussions of freedom to theology. What rarely gets mentioned is the anthropocentric bias that was integrated with free will. Free will, called liberum arbitrium, was the exclusive possession of conscious, rational human souls, creating a false distinction between humans and animals. Animals acted on pure instinct and therefore had no free will, while humans had the ability to transcend their instincts. Free will was a divine gift from God, not a product of natural phenomenon. During the Enlightenment, this perspective radically shifted. Immanuel Kant tried to resolve this by removing religion and replacing it with reason. He also rejected the Epicurean perspective, as the mechanism of atomic swerve did not produce moral and rational agents. However, he did not reject materialism. Instead, he divided reality into two realms: the phenomenal realm, where the natural world sits, the laws of physics rest, and the noumenal realm, the world of pure reason. He posited that the physical world was real and deterministic, where every action has a physical cause. However, humans occupy a unique position. They live in a realm outside space and time. Humans were rational and moral agents beyond physical bodies. Since we have the ability to deliberately stop our actions for moral choices, our minds act on this realm, operating in complete agency. This is where the libertarian definition of free will truly crystallizes on its own. The separation of body and mind, where the mind operates on a purely metaphysical basis, unbounded by biological factors. But this claim wasn't developed by Kant alone. It was inspired by René Descartes. We previously discussed his famous cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, where he created an active separation between mind and body. It seems plausible, but when you inspect it further, it simply replaces one framework with another. The separation was already placed by the religious perspective, where the human capacity for reason and morals was beyond any physical substrate. The distinction is still there, but instead of a deity providing the gift of free will, it's replaced with the ability to act as rational agents alone, without the need for God. This separation forgets that we humans ourselves are part of the natural world and are a result of evolution. The separation is not clear. With our knowledge of nature, we also know we were not the only ones who possessed this capacity. We shared the world with other hominid species, such as Neanderthals and Denisovans, and much more. With the birth of modern science, specifically biology, we were able to create a coherent, however incomplete, map of the evolution of our cognition. This gave way to research into non human animal consciousness, where we identified that non human animals have the capacity for problem solving and self recognition too. Crows are able to do basic mathematic calculations and pattern recognition. Elephants are able to recognize themselves in the mirror. We need to learn that the capacity for reason and morals may be gifts from nature herself. Now for determinism. Determinism holds that reality, including us, our consciousness, is simply the result of physical laws of nature. As we mentioned earlier, this school of thought can be traced back to the Greeks, but it truly made its mark with the development of modern science. The story starts with Descartes again. Despite his dualism and desire to preserve the soul, he also believed that the universe itself was mechanistic. He provided a framework suggesting that the laws of mathematics describe the universe. Isaac Newton pushed this even further and empirically grounded it with hard science. He discovered the laws of motion and formalized gravity. Suddenly, reality didn't just feel comprehensible, it became predictable. This was the catalyst that made determinism closer to science. After Newton, a philosopher named Pierre-Simon Laplace formulated a terrifying thought experiment. He asked, what if there was an entity, now known as the Laplace Demon, who knew exactly the position and momentum of every particle in the universe? This entity could predict every interaction with absolute certainty. Time, from past to future, would simply be an equation it would solve. This implied that even the entire dimensions of a human being, from their behaviors to their deepest thoughts to their sense of self, could be entirely predicted and captured by a supreme intellect. The notion of free will was laughable to this demon. But this was just a thought experiment. There were still many mysteries of life yet unexplored that hadn't been captured by physics at the time. Before the formalization of biology, there was a philosophical notion of vitalism. Similarly to Kant's dualism, there was a clear divide between organic and inorganic matter. Vitalism posited an unknown life force that could only be found in living beings. Scientists at the time thought that molecules of living systems could only be produced by living things. This all changed with key breakthroughs in biology. In 1828, Frederick Waller discovered that organic compounds can be found in purely inorganic materials. He heated ammonium cyanide in a flask and produced urea, an organic compound found in urine. This dismantled the notion of vitalism. Then, in 1840, Hermann von Helmholtz demonstrated that energy is conserved equally across all physical and biological systems. The same thermodynamic laws governing steam engines could be applied to muscle contraction and nerve firing. Life wasn't the exception to physics, it operated under its laws. And the final nail in the coffin was Charles Darwin, who showed that nature operated not through mystical life force or godly design, but through natural selection, where heritable traits over time produce complexity and adaptation. The origins of life became measurable and predictable. Further developments in biology, the discovery of DNA, genetics, and neuroscience started to paint a picture of determinism, where we were simply products of nature, not divine beings shaped by supernatural entities. Because of these discoveries, determinism became the dominant view within the scientific community. Great thinkers like Albert Einstein even championed this perspective. But it wasn't just science. Karl Marx, founder of the Communist Manifesto, analyzed patterns in history and found that more often than not, it was the material conditions, economic structures, class relations, and modes of production that shaped human consciousness, culture, and ideology. The inner life of human beings was not free floating, it was downstream of material reality. Then quantum mechanics arrived. This killed the Laplace Demon. Werner Heisenberg formulated the uncertainty principle in 1927 and demonstrated that one can never simultaneously know both the position and the momentum of a particle with perfect precision. Not because our instruments are inadequate, but because reality itself does not have perfectly determined values to measure. The universe, at its deepest level, carries an irreducible openness. This was, of course, exactly what Epicurus had been pointing toward 2,000 years earlier without the mathematics. The standard scientific response is that consciousness is an emergent phenomenon of classical neural computations, and even if the quantum substrate is probabilistic, consciousness remains deterministic at the classical level. Enter the hard problem. We've talked about this previously in multiple videos about consciousness. Neuroscience can tell us how we absorb information, but it cannot tell us why that information feels like something. These qualitative dimensions are not captured by any physical description, and subjective experience varies.
Two people can see the exact same thing but have different experiences of it.
Something is missing from the purely mechanistic picture. Enter Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, and their orchestrated objective reduction theory, or ORC theory for short, proposes that consciousness arises from quantum processes within microtubules, protein structures inside neurons. The theory remains controversial. The standard dismissal, the brain is too warm and wet to sustain quantum coherence. But in early 2024, researchers discovered that microtubules contain aromatic rings, tryptophan residues arranged in geometric patterns that do exhibit quantum vibrational effects at biological temperatures, maintaining coherence longer than classical physics predicted. But of course, this does not confirm OR theory, but it at least shows that quantum effects can in fact survive in biological systems, and dismantles the very argument against it. So the door remains open. Enter compatibilism. Compatibilism tries to hold both. Free will and determinism are not mutually exclusive. What matters is not whether your actions are caused, but whether the causation runs through you in the right way, whether the action flows from your own character and deliberation. Predisposition exists, but predisposition does not entail destiny. Think of a mouse in a maze. The paths are fixed and the walls are real, but it is still up to the mouse which way it goes. The maze has a solution. There is cheese at the end, but there is genuine uncertainty in every step it takes, an ontological openness in each choice. In this sense, free will can be framed as the freedom to fail. In any case, compatibilism actually traces its origins way before Laplace, to the age of the Stoics. This predates the theological redefinition of free will entirely, which means this is not a modern response to deterministic physics, but a genuine intuition that history has continued to rediscover. It starts with Chrysippus, in particular in the 3rd century BC. He demonstrates his perspective by taking a cylinder and pushing it. Using this analogy, he states that nature operates the same way. The push was external, but the rolling is its own way of expressing itself. Humans act the same way. There is always an external push, but how you respond flows from your own rational nature. The rational self-expression is freedom, even within a determined cosmos. The Stoics' true free will did not exist outside of determinism but operated under it, where the freedom lies with how you react to the external forces. It was a form of rational self-governance, where one truly masters oneself in accordance with nature, not opposed to it. Now let's fast forward a bit and look into its modern expression. The philosopher David Hume argued that freedom is acting in accordance with the determinations of your own will, not the absence of determination, but the determination that originates from within your own character and motives. He went further. Without determinism, moral responsibility becomes incoherent. If actions arise from pure randomness rather than from who you are, they are not genuinely yours. Moral accountability requires a stable agent behind the act. John Stuart Mill worked through compatibilism personally. He felt initially that if determinism were true, his character was fixed and effort was pointless. He arrived at a resolution. You can be the cause of your own future. You can deliberately cultivate habits, expose yourself to formative experiences, practice virtues, and thereby author your own character over time. It is like being tossed into a constantly moving car. You cannot control the car's movement, but you can steer the wheel. The causal chain does not bypass you, it runs through you. Freedom is not a single moment of uncaused choice. It is a longitudinal process of self-authorship over time. Compatibilism would make its way into the 20th century, where it truly became the dominant, coherent position for mainstream philosophy. Philosopher P.F. Strawson made the move that shifted compatibilism from metaphysics to phenomenology. Rather than arguing about the deep structure of causation, he stripped the metaphysics entirely and focused on how we actually live our lives. What makes us free is not a metaphysical property of our choices. It is the reactive attitudes that constitute human relationship. Gratitude, resentment, love, blame, indignation. These are not optional overlays. They are what human relationships are. No committed determinist actually abandons them. The determinist still loves their family, still feels gratitude, still gets angry when wronged. Determinism operates at a level that simply does not touch the qualitative reality of relational life. Harry Frankfurt refined this further with the structure of desire. He distinguished first-order desires, wanting something, from second-order desires, wanting to want something, or not wanting to want it. An addict has a first-order desire for the substance, but a second-order desire to be free of that desire. The conflict between these levels is what unfreedom feels like from the inside. Freedom is the coherence of your motivational structure. When your second-order desires endorse your first-order ones and you act accordingly. But compatibilism has a limit. It accepts materialism as a default foundation, and a hard determinist can still use that foundation to reduce everything compatibilism tries to preserve. Without genuinely accounting for the qualitative dimension of consciousness, the problem remains structurally open. Here's what all the three positions miss. Life does not behave like a machine. A machine does not self-replicate. It does not actively resist its own entropy. But life does. Life is dynamic, fluid, exploratory, and generative. It does not simply react to its environment. It participates in it projectively, actively changing both itself and its surroundings. Even microbes modify themselves and their environment in ways that suggest genuine agency. Life turned a barren planet into a lush, diverse biosphere, not by standing still and letting physics happen, but by actively shaping the world as it was shaped by it. This quality, exploratory, generative, self-organizing, is not well described by either strict determinism or uncaused libertarian choice. It points toward an ontological openness built into living systems, a capacity to generate novelty that is neither random nor predetermined. Connecting the framework. So, how does this connect to power? The framework we have been building, opposition creates multiplicity, a field of possible paths. Unification contains all of those paths in an open field, a degree of freedom for interaction, and specificity is when those two converge into a definite possibility, a point of singular existence that does not leave the field of probability behind, but connects with it, maintaining its degrees of freedom. Stochasticity, the probabilistic character of reality, is not randomness in the way that we think. It is an ontological openness, the mechanism that prevents existence from crystallizing into a fixed pattern and allows new forms to continuously emerge. Free will is that openness, and as reality complexifies and greater wholes emerge, that openness ensures novelty always rises, that new forms of being remain possible. Human consciousness is a highly specified configuration of this freedom, a whole independent of its parts, where predisposition creates the paths, but the primacy of subjectivity walks them. We cannot deny that we still have agency and moral responsibility. We cannot deny life's capacity to interact with its environment and actively change it. The specificity of free will in a human agent is also not just about interaction or pure observation. There is also the case of self-affirmation. It's the active defiance of being fully controlled, an ownership of one's existence. This may be the engine that fuels self-preservation, an active force that does not simply sit idle when its own self is in jeopardy, but continues to thrive and fight against its own entropy. It's the essence of every oppressed group that fights for their rights, for their agency, the ability of someone to affirm their true self despite every predisposition, despite every societal expectation, the willingness to fight for one's own right to exist. I exist, therefore I matter, and I will fight for that existence. And it is not necessarily about death, but the need to have your own life, to follow your own personal resonance, despite the resistance, to actively push back against every rational or practical argument just to affirm oneself. The one who says, "This is my life. I am the author of this story, and no one gets to write it but me." Quantum vitalism and the whole. Physicist Erwin Schrödinger, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, who formulated the wave function and the wave equation, wrote a remarkable book called What is Life? He proposed that living systems maintain order by feeding on negative entropy, and that genetic material must be an aperiodic crystal capable of storing vast information. He was practically describing DNA before its discovery. He went further. He wondered whether life didn't just obey quantum mechanics but actively exploited it in ways classical physics could not capture. He rejected the mystical claim of a life force, but agreed that classical physics alone could not explain life. So he proposed quantum vitalism, the idea that life actively uses the stochastic properties of the quantum world to generate something qualitatively new. But this raised a deeper question that physics alone could not answer. He really grappled with it. If my body functions like a pure quantum machine governed by physical laws, why do I feel a distinct, free-willed sense of personal control? The gap between the physical description and the felt experience was something he couldn't resolve through equations. And so his search didn't stop with physics. It took him east. Schrödinger studied and genuinely defended Advaita Vedanta, a school of Hindu philosophy. The doctrine at its core, Atman, is identical to Brahman. The individual soul is identical to universal consciousness. What we experience as a separate self is not a fundamental fact about reality, but a localized expression of something far greater. Individual consciousness is not a private enclosure. It is the whole looking at itself through a specific form. Schrödinger argued this directly, that the apparent multiplicity of conscious subjects is an illusion, that there is ultimately only one mind, and that each of us is a particular configuration of that singular awareness. This connects directly to the panpsychist view, where consciousness is fundamental and everything else is a derivative of it. But notice where standard panpsychism stops. It grounds consciousness in particles and atoms at the level of the smallest parts. Schrödinger's quantum vitalism points to something more fundamental. Particles are not the bottom level. As we discuss, they are excitations of waves. What seems separate is simply contained within the whole. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts, precisely because the whole was always what was fundamental. The parts are how it differentiates itself, not the other way around. To connect back to the framework, power is not just a commanding point of existence, it is the whole. The point is what specifies, but it is the whole that truly organizes everything. Existence separates itself only to form a greater version of itself, complexifying into a multiplicity of forms, beginning a journey of self-discovery. So where does this leave free will? Probability is no longer about randomness. It is wholeness, every possibility in the field, a unification of all possible paths. Then specificity, a point of singular identification, is the smallest possible unit to construct a greater unified system. But this point doesn't leave probability behind. It connects with it. It retains its degrees of freedom, giving it the space to explore new possibilities, new forms of being. The definite and indefinite oscillate in a constant feedback loop of existence. It is by tapping into this wholeness that we are allowed true freedom to explore, to interact, to shape, to project our own existence into the world. Duality is a mechanism, not the source. Wholeness is the binding force, the creative force that generates reality, that generates itself. Not mind over matter, not matter over mind, but the same thing in a different form. Separation was an illusion reality told itself to experience itself. Thank you, conscious colleagues, for lending me your ear. This topic was dense and featured the historical evolution of the concept of free will, what it truly means for our existence, and how it connects to the deepest structures of reality. In the next episode, we will be expanding the relational aspect of possibilities, viewing the framework called the pendulum of power that measures how possibilities become actualized, how dreams become reality, how the impossible becomes possible. Thank you, and see you on the next episode.